The first thing I saw when I pulled into that luxury neighborhood wasn't the $500,000 houses, the perfectly trimmed lawns, or the giant stone entrance that made the place look like a private resort. It was three black cameras staring straight down at my crew like we were criminals. And what made it worse was that nobody asked, nobody warned me, and nobody thought I deserved an explanation. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm 36 years old, and I run a small pool construction company outside of Georgetown, Texas. I'm not a billionaire. I'm not some corporate guy with a fancy office. I'm the guy who shows up before sunrise with concrete dust on his boots, coffee in a paper cup, and a truck that has more scratches than paint. For years, I've built pools for people who wanted a place to relax, a place where their families could make memories. And I always believed that no matter how wealthy someone was, the people doing the work deserved basic respect. But that belief got tested when I took a job building a $340,000 community pool for a gated neighborhood called Willow Creek Estates. On paper, it sounded like a dream project. The neighborhood sat just outside Austin, surrounded by tall iron gates, expensive landscaping, and homes that looked like they belonged in a magazine. These people had outdoor kitchens bigger than my first apartment, wine rooms underground, and driveways so clean you could probably eat off them. Meanwhile, my old Ford F-250 had over 180,000 miles on it. My toolbox smelled like chlorine and cement, and my crew knew every gas station between my shop and the job site, because that was where we grabbed breakfast before a long day. But honestly, I didn't care about the difference. Money never bothered me. Attitude did. The first 11 days of construction went smoothly. My team was moving fast, pouring sections of the pool foundation, installing plumbing, and preparing everything for the summer opening date. The HOA board was excited because they had promised their residents the new pool would be ready before the 4th of July weekend. They had already collected special assessments from dozens of homeowners, and everyone wanted this project finished. Then came day 12. I arrived at 5:45 in the morning, like I always did, expecting another normal workday. The sun was barely coming up. The air was already getting warm, and my guys were unloading equipment when I noticed something strange near the entrance of the pool area. At first, I thought they were security lights. Then I looked closer. 3 brand new cameras were attached to HOA-owned light poles, all pointed directly at my construction zone, not toward the entrance, not toward the equipment storage area, directly at my workers. I remember just standing there for a moment, trying to figure out if I was missing something. Maybe there was a notice I didn't see. Maybe someone forgot to tell me. So I walked around looking for paperwork, emails, anything, nothing. I checked my contract right there on the hood of my truck. There was no surveillance clause, no permission agreement, no section saying the HOA could record my crew while they worked. I called my project contact, Mark, and asked him what was going on. He got quiet for a second and then said, "Oh, Karen probably had those installed. She wanted to keep an eye on progress." Karen Whitmore was the HOA president. She was the kind of person who carried a binder to every meeting and somehow made a simple neighborhood discussion feel like a courtroom hearing. She wasn't evil, at least not in the way movies show it, but she had a serious need to control everything around her. Every mailbox had to be perfect. Every lawn had to be the right shade of green, and every rule had to be followed exactly the way she interpreted it. I walked into the HOA office that afternoon and asked her directly about the cameras. She didn't even look surprised. She just smiled and said, "Ethan, this is a very expensive project. The homeowners deserve to know what's happening." I nodded and said, "I understand wanting updates, Karen, but recording my crew all day without asking isn't an update. That's surveillance." She leaned back in her chair and gave me that look people give when they think they already won the argument. "You're building on HOA property," she said. "We have a right to protect our investment." That sentence stayed with me because it told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't trying to protect the project. She was trying to establish control. What she didn't realize was one small detail buried inside our agreement. The HOA owned the land, but they didn't own the finished project yet. Until I signed the final completion certificate, the pool was still under my responsibility. Without my signature, they couldn't legally open it. They couldn't host their grand opening. They couldn't show residents their expensive new amenity. They needed me just as much as I needed the job, and for the first time in that entire situation, I realized something important. Karen thought those cameras gave her power. She had no idea she had just handed me the exact reason I needed to take control back. The next morning, I showed up at Willow Creek Estates with a completely different mindset. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger makes people sloppy, and I've learned over the years that the person who stays calm usually has the advantage. My crew noticed it too. They could tell something had changed. Mike, my foreman, walked over while we were unloading equipment and asked, "So what's the plan, boss? We fighting this thing or just ignoring it?" I looked up at those cameras sitting on the poles and said, "Neither. We're going to make them understand exactly what they created." I wasn't interested in a screaming match with Karen. I wasn't going to stand in the HOA office and trade insults with someone who thought a title on a neighborhood committee made her untouchable. I wanted everything documented, everything professional, and everything impossible to dismiss. So I did something that confused everyone at first. I ordered 4 industrial LED work lights, the kind used on commercial construction sites, each one powerful enough to light up a massive area at night. When they arrived, my crew helped me mount them onto the temporary scaffolding around the pool. Then I adjusted the angle carefully, not toward houses, not toward sidewalks, not toward anyone's property, straight toward the camera lenses. Mike looked at me and laughed. "You know those cameras are going to hate you, right?" I smiled and said, "That's kind of the point. The lights weren't there to damage anything. They weren't illegal. They weren't dangerous. They simply created a bright reflection that made the cameras useless for monitoring our work." The HOA wanted a front row seat. They got the brightest seat in the stadium. By the end of the first day, Karen called me. I answered because I wanted to hear what she had to say. "Ethan, what exactly are you doing?" she asked. Her voice had that same tone she used in meetings, the one that suggested she expected everyone to apologize before they even explained themselves. "Working," I said. "That's what I'm doing." "You installed lights pointed directly at HOA cameras?" "No, Karen. I installed job site lighting. The fact that your cameras are facing my work area is a separate issue." There was silence on the phone. It was the first time I noticed she didn't have a quick response. She wasn't used to people challenging the way she frames things. "You're being difficult," she finally said. I looked around at my crew working under the hot Texas sun and replied, "No, Karen. I'm being careful." The next morning, I made my second move. I posted an official notice at the entrance of the construction area. Work temporarily paused due to unresolved site surveillance concerns and worker privacy issues. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't threatening. It was just the truth. My crew had been uncomfortable for days. They felt like every conversation, every break, every moment they stepped away from the equipment was being watched. And honestly, I understood why. Construction workers already deal with enough pressure. The heat, the physical demands, the deadlines, the constant problem solving. They don't need someone sitting behind a screen judging every movement they make. By noon, Karen was calling everyone she could. She called my office. She called the project manager. She even called 2 of my suppliers trying to figure out if she could pressure me from another direction. But nobody had a solution for her because nobody had created this situation except the HOA. Over the next 2 days, my phone became a non-stop source of entertainment. I had 8 voicemails from Karen. The first few were polite. "Ethan, we need to discuss this." Then they became more aggressive. "You are putting the community at risk." Then eventually they became threats. "Our attorney will be contacting you. Your reputation will suffer if you continue this. The homeowners will know who delayed their pool." But what was interesting was what she never said. She never said, "We'll remove the cameras." Not once. That told me everything. This was never about safety. It was about control. Karen didn't want to solve the problem because admitting she was wrong would mean losing authority. And for some people, admitting they crossed a line feels worse than paying the consequences. So I sat down at my desk that evening and started preparing paperwork. I reviewed every part of the contract. I documented every conversation. I saved every message. Then I created an invoice. Not a revenge bill. Not a random number designed to scare them. A professional invoice based on the changes required because of the environment they created. The first line item was privacy compliance modification, $47,000. This covered the additional site adjustments, documentation, and procedures required because the work area had been placed under unauthorized monitoring. The second was hostile work environment remediation, $18,500. This covered the interruption, additional coordination, and corrective measures needed to restore normal working conditions. The third was worker safety upgrades, $31,000. That included shade structures, additional water stations, heat monitoring equipment, private job site cameras, rest areas, and protective measures for my crew working through a brutal Texas summer. The total came out to $96,500. I attached a simple letter, payment due within 72 hours, or I would begin the process of filing a mechanic's lien against the project. I knew exactly what would happen next. They would laugh. People like Karen always laugh first. They laugh because they believe confidence means they're right. The invoice was delivered on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, the HOA board meeting was probably chaos. I could imagine it. Everyone sitting around that polished conference table, staring at a number they never expected to see. Someone probably saying, "He can't do this." Someone else probably saying, "This will never hold up." And Karen, I was sure, was telling everyone that I was bluffing. But there was one thing they didn't understand about people who work with their hands. We know the difference between a threat and a plan. A threat is something you say when you want attention. A plan is something you prepare when you already know what happens next. And I had prepared. The first 24 hours passed. No response. 48 hours passed. Still nothing. The cameras remained. The pool remained unfinished. The 4th of July deadline was getting closer. Then, on the morning of the third day, something changed. The phone rang. And this time it wasn't Karen leaving another angry message. It was Karen herself asking if we could meet at the construction site. And the way she said it was different. There was no confidence, no lecture, no accusation, just a quiet sentence that told me the balance of power had shifted. "Eaton, we need to talk about a solution." Karen arrived at the construction site just after 9:00 morning, and honestly, I almost didn't recognize the person walking toward me. This was the same woman who had stood in the HOA office a few days earlier with perfect posture, crossed arms, and that calm little smile people wear when they believe the conversation is already over before it begins. But this time was different. There was no confidence act, no stack of neighborhood rules, no speech about protecting homeowners' investments. She stepped out of her SUV holding a folder against her chest, looked at the unfinished pool, looked at my crew, and then looked up at the cameras that had caused this entire mess. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. The funny thing about construction sites is that silence feels different there. At home, silence can feel peaceful. On a job site, silence usually means everyone is waiting to see what happens next. My guys were pretending not to watch, but I knew they were listening. They had been to every argument, every phone call, every stressful moment. They knew this wasn't just about a camera anymore. It was about whether someone with a little authority could push around people who didn't have the same amount of money or influence. Karen finally walked over and said, "Ethan, I think we need to find a way to resolve this." I looked at her and said, "That's exactly what I wanted 3 days ago." She paused, and for once, she didn't have a quick answer. That was the moment I realized something. This whole situation had never been about the pool. The pool was just the battlefield. The real issue was whether people were willing to respect boundaries when nobody forced them to. She opened the folder and handed it to me. Inside was a check for the full amount of my invoice, $96,500. But underneath that was something I didn't expect. A new 5-year agreement between my company and Willow Creek Estates. They wanted me to become their exclusive contractor for future water projects, from pool repairs to fountains and community features. But the part that caught my attention was the new surveillance clause. Any cameras, monitoring devices, or recording equipment placed near an active work area would require written approval from the contractor and clear communication with the workers. I read through the paperwork carefully because I wasn't going to make the same mistake they did. I wasn't going to assume. I wasn't going to trust a handshake after everything that happened. Karen watched me reading and finally said, "The board didn't expect this to get this far." I looked up and said, "Neither did I." She nodded slowly. "I think we forgot something. We were so focused on protecting the homeowners' money that we forgot the people building this project were part of the investment too." That sentence actually surprised me because it was probably the first honest thing I had heard from her since this started. I had spent days thinking about Karen as the enemy, the person standing between my crew and a normal workday. But in that moment, I saw something else. I saw someone who had gotten so comfortable being in charge that she stopped noticing when leadership turned into control. And I think that happens more often than people want to admit. Sometimes the problem isn't that someone has power. The problem is when they forget that power comes with responsibility. I signed the final completion agreement that afternoon, but before I put my name on the paperwork, I reminded Karen about one thing. The cameras come down first. She didn't argue. She simply nodded. By sunset, those 3 cameras were gone. Watching them being removed felt better than seeing the check. The money mattered, obviously. I run a business. I have employees. Bills don't disappear because someone has a disagreement. But the cameras represented something bigger. They represented the idea that someone could watch over my crew, make decisions about them, and never once ask if it was okay. When those cameras came down, it felt like the entire atmosphere of the job site changed. The next morning, something happened that I never expected. The HOA started putting the money from that invoice to work. The shade structures went up around the pool deck. New cold water stations were installed. Heat monitoring equipment arrived. A proper rest area was created where my crew could get out of the Texas sun during the hottest part of the day. They even upgraded the job site communication system so future contractors could coordinate with the HOA without confusion. The same organization that had created the problem ended up funding the solution. And I have to admit, there was something satisfying about that. Not because I wanted them punished, but because the outcome was actually better than simply winning an argument. Anyone can argue. Anyone can point fingers. But fixing the problem is harder. The pool opened on July 3rd, one day before the original deadline. The neighborhood held their grand opening, and families came out to enjoy something my crew had spent weeks building. Kids were running around. Homeowners were taking pictures, and the same people who had been stressed about delays were now celebrating. I stood near the edge of the pool watching my team take a break under the new shade structures, and I thought about how close everything came to going wrong. All because a few cameras were installed without a conversation. Looking back, I don't think Karen woke up one morning planning to be the villain in my story. I think she believed she was doing her job. She believed more control meant fewer problems. But sometimes trying to control everything creates the exact problem you were trying to prevent. The cameras were supposed to show the HOA that they were in charge. Instead, they showed everyone that respect cannot be demanded. It has to be earned. And maybe that's the part people forget when they join committees, boards, or positions of authority. A title might give you a seat at the table, but it doesn't make you better than the people sitting around it. The workers, the contractors, the homeowners, everyone has a role. And when one person starts acting like their role matters more than everyone else's, eventually someone pushes back. So now I'm curious what you think. Was I right to stop the project until the surveillance issue was fixed? Or do you think I should have handled it differently? Have you ever dealt with an HOA, a boss, a neighbor, or anyone who confused authority with control? Tell me your story in the comments because I know I'm not the only person who has dealt with a situation like this. Sometimes the smallest conflicts reveal the biggest problems in a community. And sometimes, the best way to create change is simply having the courage to say, no, this isn't okay. If you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who has ever felt powerless against a system or a person who thought rules only applied to everyone else. I read your comments, and some of the most interesting stories come from real experiences people have lived through. Because, at the end of the day, every neighborhood has rules. Every community has leaders. But respect is something nobody can write into a rulebook.